Hola, ok, encendido usualmente funciona mejor. Y nada, espero que hayan disfrutado, que hayan tenido tiempo también para comer. Y nada, ¿cómo están? Bien, todavía los escucho un poco apagados, pero está bien. Sé que con esta siguiente, sé que es una charla que muchos han estado esperando, yo también. Y quiero presentarles a una personalidad del mundo de desarrollo, que es además un talentoso director. Quiero recordarles que esta charla va a ser en inglés. This talk will be in English. So remember, recuerden, tenemos aparatos de traducción simultánea en la parte de atrás. And yes, as I was saying, I want to introduce our next guest. He is a very talented man in such many ways. Not only he is an owner, he's a great writer, he's a narrative director. I just recently found out he's also a great dancer. Please welcome Xalavier Nelson Jr.
My dance skills are much exaggerated. I'm just enthusiastic. It's the unearned American confidence. That's what sells it. So, my name is, me llamo Xalavier Nelson Jr. Mi trabajo es en videojuegos. Lo siento for my poor Spanish. I'm trying so hard. I'm doing Duolingo between meetings. You deserve it! So first of all, I would like to thank Jalisco, the city of Guadalajara, and Pixelatl Festival for their hospitality. I am honored to be here. I've literally circumnavigated the globe, and Pixelatl Festival is one of the most impressive showcases and displays of creative human beings in the entire world. Now, with that said, there was a little bit of a mix-up. No one asked me what my talk would be about. So I spent like months agonizing over the talk, and then I spent a very, very bleary weekend writing the talk, and then I discovered that the program invented a talk for me. I'm not talking about storytelling in video games at all. What I am talking about, though, is relevant to a lot of people in this room. I'm talking about your story, the story of your career, your perspective and your abilities, the story of your potential partners and funders with whom you will collaborate to bring your creative efforts to life, and the story of the systems that we are working within to distribute the art that we love. This is all hopefully going to provide a process and an insight not just into the way that I work, but also a potential answer for you to the question of how to make a living in a creative medium without going crazy. So, without further ado, I do a lot of shit. I've worked on over 60 video games in the past 7 years. I've been in my industry for over 13. Before I was developing games as a designer, writer, producer, and more, as well as a director, I was a games journalist. So I ran a column for PC Gamer magazine for 2 years, among other things. I have work in print and in RPGs and in board games. I write comics, and I've had the blessing to go around the globe delivering talks and weird games where I wear Jeff Goldblum masks that are hopefully educational, entertaining, and sometimes, when I'm very lucky, both. This talk is titled, "There Are 7,000 Wolves Inside of You." And that's because I believe it. It is a reference to the meme, "Inside you, there are 2 wolves," which is itself a reference to an even older parable As the story goes, inside of every person there are two wolves, one that is purely good, one that is purely evil, and they're constantly struggling, and the one that is going to win is the wolf that you feed. It refers to the habits that we nurture, the things that we take for granted, and how this affects our character. But I believe inside of this meme, there's an even greater, deeper meaning if we expand the metaphor. If we dig down into the root of human history, we are contradictory creatures. We want opposing things all of the time, and this is the root not just of so much of our creativity and our creative output, but of our pain. On one side, you might say as a creator, F the man, I'm gonna tell my own stories about my own culture. I'm not gonna feed some corporation. And that same person will say, but it would be really cool to work on a Batman game though. Like if you just let me work on a Batman game, that would be really cool. And you would be stunned. In my conversations with thousands of creators, the people who achieve either dream, the indie darlings, still feel a missing validation from not getting that big budget, big IP Batman game, as just an example. And the people who are in that big budget media IP property feel like they've sold out, like they are not fulfilling their true potential or telling the stories that they can and should in the limited time that they have in this world. And with that in mind, I do a lot of consulting. Again, I've worked on over 60 games in the past 7 years. I've had the ability to see games in particular, but a wide variety of mediums from almost every level of seniority in terms of their production, their working methodologies, and why these products exist in the first place. And the 4 categories of consulting that I do when I talk to these people about contradictions fall into talking about their companies, about their projects, about their career moves, and even about their personal lives. And the thing that continues to stun me is that regardless of the scale, whether it's a beginning creator or someone who's been in the industry for 20 years, whether it is $3 on the line or 3 million, so many of the core concerns that creators face are fundamentally the same. We are operating upon values all of the time. Companies have values. Projects have values from which they make decisions and build systems which affect the creations that they make. And not confronting or acknowledging these values results in some of the greatest disasters we've seen in terms of creative output and production, if not just the normal human pain that occurs during the course of a development cycle. We have values, and it is stunning how often we do not confront the fact that those values, those priorities contradict each other. So hopefully in the course of this talk, again, we can dig into your own values, find out how to identify the values of your partners or potential partners, and how to relate to the seemingly monolithic systems in which we are trying to bring our creative products to life. To start, we need to get a shared definition of the word values. So for the purpose of this talk, I'm defining values as the internal priorities that determine an entity's decisions and behaviors whether or not they have been chosen intentionally. The internal priorities that determine someone's decisions and behaviors. It isn't necessarily I'm gonna get out of the way of my own slide. It isn't necessarily that these values are arbitrary battlegrounds. They just represent decision points. And for some of the people in this room, what I'm about to talk about may not be a decision at all. You don't want a camera on your face ever. Other people, if they are not famous before the age of 22, they will die. They will tell you that they are going to die. When we face a set of contradictory values, such as what we do about privacy or visibility in the internet and social media age, we aren't necessarily looking at something that is a set-in-stone decision that someone must make, or something that we even have control over. What we can have, however, if we identify and acknowledge the presence of a choice in attitude and behavior in the first place is figure out how we will handle the course of life as it comes towards us. So in this case, the decision point is, I value visibility versus I value my privacy. If you are a visible creator, if you have 1.2 million followers on Instagram, you have certain career opportunities that would never otherwise be available to you. You have leverage in negotiations. You have a social safety net where if you get hit by a car, it's grim, but enough people might care about whether you live or die to fund the GoFundMe for your hospital bills. These are real decisions that creators are making in 2022 to figure out how they relate to making their creative efforts real in the information age. And if you're visible, it's assumed because you have a lot of followers that you're also influential or powerful, and that may not indeed be the case. Some of the most powerful people I know do not have social media, and they're all old white guys. Someone who says, I value my privacy, you get a degree of security and mobility. You can take pictures of you and your friends without worrying if you're going to sick a harassment mob on the people you love. You get to control your image instead of have it controlled by the many thousands of perspectives that people will have on you. But you do, to a certain degree, lack agency. This is not a end-all, be-all conversation, but it is an illustration of the fact that when you get to choose between these values and acknowledge their presence, you can, as a creator, suddenly have a much more clear path to understanding what you prioritize and love, and how you're going to take, what opportunities you reject, what opportunities you take, and how you're going to approach your creative future. So when I get asked by a new student or by someone starting a studio for the first time by themselves, even if they've been in the industry for decades, should I be a brand? My first response is that there is no should. There is not a right answer between these decision points. You might pick something in the middle. What's important is that you have the self-knowledge and the accurate ability to look inside of yourself and ask, can I handle all of the implications that come with existing as a branded creator, as someone who is visible within my industry? The general chain in which I think about a value-based perspective is that your values, your priorities lead to decisions and behaviors. The decisions and behaviors lead to natural consequences and implications, things that you must do to fulfill those mandates. And finally, outcomes. We can't guarantee success for literally anything, and it's really frustrating, but we can align ourselves with what success means for ourselves and figure out, if we get a different definition of success, how we're going to approach, again, how we move going forward. Within this context, what I'm describing is that values are always choices, whether or not they're intentionally made. The decision between should I be a brand or not, that is, just because you haven't looked at it doesn't mean it's not there. But if you have looked at it, you suddenly have a level of power and agency that our modern world does in many ways not tell us that we have any sort of influence over the consequences of our actions. So, to lead to another concrete example of a value decision, people ask me about work-life balance, especially if they're younger creators. Should I crunch? And I would love to stand up here and say, work 40 hours a week or less, always hydrate, eat 3 regular meals a day. But not only is that not possible for a great percentage of people, unfortunately, I cannot honestly get up here and say I would not be here without periods of sometimes sustained overwork. Recently, because of a miscommunication on a team I'm on, I was informed on a Wednesday afternoon that unless I wrote an entire new act of a video game by Thursday morning, an entire team of people would not be paid. I worked from Wednesday afternoon to Thursday morning to hit that goal because I'm not going to see people not be able to potentially feed their families or pay their rent. That's not good. No, that's a horrible failure. Something went wrong. Let's not clap to that. What I'm illustrating is, I see a lot of especially younger creators who are tied up in knots because they say, I'm having a good work-life balance, I have a social life and a work life, but I'm not getting the same results. And it's because they're looking up to their creators who might now have the luxury to say, I'm not going to crunch, but did not previously have that. Or perhaps because of decisions that they have made, because they like working a lot, are producing what is the equivalent of 60 to 80 hours of work, and you are stuck trying to achieve that with half of the available resources. And this gets really interesting when you consider it within the context of that question, do I maintain work-life balance? What does your company reward? When someone is starting a project or a company, or is midway through it, I have often been brought into the middle of a project, or the end of the project, to be a fixer, to look at something that is very much on fire and make it slightly less crispy and try to make the project as good as possible without destroying the team in the process. And I am asked in one way or another, usually not these exact words, is crunch inevitable in my organization? For those who aren't familiar with the term crunch, it's just sustained periods of overwork when you're working a 15-hour shift because someone didn't tell you something until a Wednesday. And the thing is, you might be, because you have a certain ambition and you don't have enough time or enough money, or simply because of the values your organization has, you might be propagating a culture of overwork that cannot be stopped until you confront the root causes for the conditions that are now arising. And the same is true if we're talking about the people that are promoted and spotlighted within your organization. If every person that you promote within your organization is staying at the office late, or working off of hours, or not billing for their full time, and you're like, that's chiliganas, that's good. We're gonna reward that. You cannot be surprised when over time, your entire organization becomes chiliganas, chiliganas, chiliganas. I hope I'm saying that right. A value prioritization that does not incorporate self-knowledge is fundamentally useless. This is why, again, I use self-knowledge to not just mean yourself, but your project, your organization, what you are inherently creating as a pattern. This is why New Year's resolutions infamously tend to fail, because you say, I'm going to read a book every week. But if it doesn't relax you to read a book and you need to relax, pretty soon you will find that your schedule has no space for you to read a book a week. If it is more enjoyable for you to eat a brownie than to do 15 minutes of weight training, let yourself eat the gosh damn brownie. Eat the brownie. And accept the consequences of it, right? This is all about creating a personal process to identify what you care about, and if it's not producing the results that you want, to change it. Critical issues arise from making choices between competing values, operating in contradiction to your personal priorities and working patterns, or not recognizing a choice at all. You know whether or not you work better in the night or in the morning. You know your financial stability, how much you can afford to risk to bring something to life. And when you are receiving advice from privileged sources, it is so easy to follow it because you want what they have attained, without having the self-knowledge to know, even if you gained it, it wouldn't make you happy. If we do not confront this, particularly as creators in this time, we're going to be shipwrecked, because we're constantly, as industries, moving towards monopoly, towards consolidation, towards a standardized set of solutions for how we make things and how we bring them into the world. And those patterns for bringing things to life, as several people in this room can probably attest, are inherently unsustainable. If we do not confront this sustainability on an individual, a corporate, and on a project-based basis, we're going to wipe out the most exciting generation of creators we've ever had before they've even had the opportunity to lead us into the future in the first place. Which brings me to how values impact the productions of a project. We talk about contradictions, about how if we aren't operating from self-knowledge, if we're operating in a space of contradiction, or at least not making the compromise intentionally with full knowledge of what that encapsulates, we're going to break ourselves in the process. This applies to, in the video games, photorealism versus low fidelity development. A lot of big games promise that they're going to have giant, regular, free updates to bring in new players. However, if they have a photorealistic art style, that has a cost. That means lip sync. That means extra quality assurance to ensure that someone's face doesn't clip through their teeth and then they're all bent as a and everything glitches out and people give you a bad review or talk about it on YouTube. Photorealism has a lot of appeals, but it also carries inherent workflow strain that if you don't have the resources to support it, suddenly you find yourself releasing the game, starting on the first big update and realizing you physically, unless you are a wizard, cannot with your team produce what you are promising within the time promised. If you're low fidelity, there's also costs of that as well. There's people who will not buy a game unless it looks like it will make their eyes bleed. But it also, if it is in alignment with your overall strategy, if it is in alignment with your working patterns, if it's in alignment with what you can do and how you want to do it, you suddenly, it's like you've gained a superpower, the ability to look at yourself and your situation and evaluate all of the factors involved and say, this is the course that I will take, and I know it's going to work. If you change the production cycle, you change the project. And that is why it's heartbreaking that one of the first things you lose sometimes when taking on a given funder or project partner is the ability to define and control the process that allows you to protect yourself or your team. Again, values lead to decisions and behaviors, lead to consequences and systems and outcomes. And actually, if you look at the results, say a major delay for a game and its big update, you can work your way back and say, that's why that happened. It's because of the values, or at least the decisions, at the top of the root. We are not incentivized by the systems that we exist within, however, to ask these questions. Because if you are seemingly surrounded by money, it feels really bad to realize, oh God, there's only really 3 people who I can work with who would understand the project I'm making. And if they don't accept me, I'm inherently stepping into a contradictory design space. However, isn't it better to know that you are making the compromise than to step in and be miserable and endure all of the implications of the decisions and the partners that you have incurred? And feel stuck and lost and not have a direct thing you can point to and say, this is why I am cansado, why I'm anxious, why I am racked with doubt of whether or not I should be doing this at all. Society, I hate to say that we live in a society, but society does not encourage us to ask these questions of ourselves, our projects, and our studios, because it does, at least at first blush, feel like we are closing off the opportunities we have. But for every opportunity we close off, intentionally or not, we again gain the capability to work in our desired and necessary patterns to make things that are legitimately new. And that just because they're new doesn't mean that they're not reasonable. And where a value-based perspective gets really head-trippy and will make you have a lot of thoughts about capitalism and life and dating apps and electricity and the food you eat and where you go and how you get there, is that when you begin to adopt this perspective and look for this process in yourself, for your team, for your project, you begin to recognize that you exist in a universe of systems that are all operating on the same logic. And from this perspective, the great thing is, if you know yourself and you know your process and you have the same chain of decisions, you can decide how you are going to relate to these systems in order to, again, define a better, sustainable, reasonable, creative future, even if it doesn't look like anyone else's. And as a concrete example of this, I'm going to talk about engagement-based releases. Again, speaking from video games because it's the world I know, and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but this being a pretty universally applicable concept, when Apple on the App Store defines a must-play game as an evolving world filled with exciting events, you cannot be surprised when all of the games start to do free, big updates. They exist within a system that, when visibility is what often defines whether or not you live or die, if the system gives you another burst of visibility when you're recently updated, guess what? You're probably going to update, particularly if your livelihood depends on it. The system creates the result. The result is successful, and then the system says, hey, everybody successful is doing this thing, maybe you should do that. Often without confronting that they created the environment for those results in the first place. It is the most frustrating fucking thing in the entire gosh damn world to talk to brilliant designers, people who build systems for a living, people who have more money than any human being should ever have or can spend in a dozen lifetimes. And they raise their hands because they're like, oh, it's weird that this keeps succeeding when we make it succeed. And we can see a similar thing occur even in the world of streaming. Netflix, famous for pioneering the day one release model, takes its biggest IP, arguably, Stranger Things, splits it into 2 volumes. Why? It's partially a recognition that a big day one release uses all of your press and media attention at the same time, but it's also a determination of values. If Netflix is looking for engagement, if what they're prioritizing is keeping a subscriber in for just 1 more month, of course it makes sense for HBO Max to move to weekly releases, or to split your biggest release of the year into 2 parts, because you need another burst of attention, another thing to make someone care about you in a world where the accumulated care of enough people, whether or not it's statistically established, can decide whether or not your program gets renewed or not. And as I discuss the systems that we are within, it is easy to feel that these systems that might be objectively undesirable or undesirable to you specifically are inevitable. All you can do is decide to work with them and figure out just how long you can do it before you quit. But there is hope, because this exact same process shows us that if we are looking through a lens of values, all we're looking at are domino effects. Change one domino effect within the system, advocate for one domino effect within the system, change one part of your relation to that system, and you suddenly have an avenue to make this awful Tower of Babel-like construction fall to the ground. Or at the very least, be something that you can exist within without going crazy. Additionally, in the digital age that we currently occupy, we have unique opportunities through things like Kickstarter, Patreon, hundreds, dozens, I hope there's hundreds of ways we can make decisions, processes, and strategies to say, if we don't like a system, we'll choose a different way to relate to it. For my own part, I've worked on games that constantly updated, and I can, but I don't like it. So when I direct projects for my own studio, we recently made a decision that we largely are not going to do a constant update of older projects. We want to release new things, spin-offs, things that are within the same universe or same technology but do something interesting or weird. Because we know our working process accommodates that best. It makes us happy. And with that working process in mind, we can and have already found ways that we can support our own working processes, our ideals, without falling behind in that system. Instead of constantly updating a single project, We've released, I think, like 4 projects this year. We've got another 2 coming out. We're publishing one that comes out in like a month. Pray for me. You can, indeed, choose a different path within these systems. It's a matter of knowing that the path is there in the first place and evaluating honestly, again, yourself and the system that you exist within. The only way that we fail as we confront this gargantuan chain of decisions, the series of contradictions within ourselves, the question of how do I make sure that I can do what I love tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and get paid for it. The only way we fail is when we assume that the answers that currently exist or that have worked for others are the only ones that do exist. Our future, if there is any hope I can provide in this talk at all, as I promised myself I wouldn't talk about capitalism, but I had to. If there is any hope I can provide, and if there's anything you take from this talk, it is that you can find alternative answers, particularly in this time as a creator. The tools are in your hands. I wish you luck. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions at all, I would be delighted to answer them. How does Q&A work? Do I just point at a person? You in the cool gray face mask. There is a process, it turns out. Okay. Cool gray face mask. I've already promised it to them, and I don't want them to resent me.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Well, first of all, really inspiring. This is something I really needed to hear. I've been struggling a lot with a lot of conflicting things, as you mentioned, and well, I need to hear it. And I guess this question is more unrelated, a bit unrelated to what you talked about. But since, I mean, first of all, you work on Pixelatl, love that game.
Thank you.
And it's kind of like a small question regarding, you know, video games and narratives and that kind of stuff. How do you write a script for those? I still struggle to do that.
So in this case, I can actually relate it back to the central message because I'm just that good.
Yeah, sure.
The thing about Hypnospace Outlaw is my job as the narrative lead on that project was to look at something of potentially infinite scope. For those who are not familiar, it's a Y2K era internet simulator. And when you're simulating the entire internet, that's a lot of stuff. I evaluated my own personal capacity for taking on a new project. I looked at what the inherent patterns inside of the project were, what was fast for us to build, what was cheap for us to build, what caused the least pain, what caused more pain but was worth doing. And yeah, from that basis, creating increasingly tighter sets of constraints for myself, I was able to do what felt like a magic trick, finding a way to tell a coherent story in an entire game filled with seemingly unrelated content. So from that perspective, yeah, whenever I take on a consulting job or even just a regular freelance job, I'm working on some very large IP right now, I spend as much time for my own working process, if not more, talking about constraints and what the stakeholders need and what we're attempting to accomplish and what we can accomplish with the tools that we have than actually writing. Because the writing isn't the hard part for me. The hard part is when you write this brilliant, beautiful story and then find out 3 months later that you have 1 week to change it. And that happens really, really often. Does that answer your question? Rad. You in the front.
See. Hi, first of all, really good talk. I wanted to ask, I wrote it down. When you were gaining a momentum of growth in your career, how did you evaluate the opportunities presented to you and see what you would or wouldn't take on? And on that note, what advice would you give to independent game developers on controlling this process of growth within a system like the games industry, while avoiding the enforcement of the values we don't want to support, like crunch or unhealthy work-life balance in them? Thank you.
The second part is an entire talk in itself, so I'm not sure I can help too much with that. But as far as when I was looking at my own career momentum and realizing that I had gone from hoping to God that someone would give me a job to people offering me jobs, I used the process. I know for myself that I love to make things and walk away from them. Make things, walk away from them. It's not that I can't commit, regardless of what my partners might say. They've never said that. I commit too quickly. I'm living a lie. So it's not, I looked at the fact that I loved shorter development processes, complete development processes, and that frankly, as a black person working in games, I came from a very lower middle class background. My parents got married in Las Vegas when my mom was already pregnant with me, and their version of a honeymoon was looking for change on the Vegas trip, talking about what their life together might be. A lot of sacrifice occurred so that I could be where I am, and I didn't want to tell my dad that all that sacrifice meant nothing, but I got to work on an Assassin's Creed. I wanted to have an internal safety net to be able to prove that I could work on literally anything. So when opportunities started to come in, I was like, have I worked in that genre before? Increasingly, as I had positive and negative experiences, I was like, how is this developer approaching their development process? Am I actually the right fit for this job? Sometimes there's times I needed a job and I declined it anyway because I knew that at least the working process that would be required to bring this exciting thing to life wouldn't work with me. And I would say that, yeah, that was the key for momentum. There's a lot of, it always feels, especially when you come out of what feels like darkness, everything looks shiny. But the more you know yourself and what you need to be an effective creator, the more you can evaluate which of those shiny things are for you and which you can pass on to another person to support their creative future. White shirt.
Well, thank you for your talk. It was a very good one. And actually, well, my question is that actually in Mexico is one of the countries in the world where more hours a week of work are done. And I think that the last time I checked is more than Japan and South Korea. And it's actually frustrating as a Mexican to know that, well, where are those hours of work going, you know? So hearing your talk makes me think like, what does a company or a country or as a person, you need to change those values that you were mentioning to change the system? You know, so how do you approach those values that need to change the system, right? Or is it more books, more novels, more games? I don't know, like, how do you approach that?
A lot of it, in my experience, is proving that it can be done. So working with clients, there's times that, for example, working with clients, they will say, we want a given thing. Especially if you have any freedom or agency to continue to discuss with them instead of just doing the job, you can ask what they are attempting to achieve with that thing. And you'll be like, the best contractor. They're gonna love you. They'll be like, oh, they're asking all these questions about process and how they can be like more effective and cost us less money. That's great. And if you can prove that you can do, if you can have an ability to exercise some autonomy and prove that this 90-hour task isn't necessary, I can do it in 40 hours, but you should pay me for the 90 because I'm saving you the time that it would take to bring other people in and change it over and over again to achieve the same result. It's worked for me, and I've seen it also work from others, especially from marginalized backgrounds, to sort of question the assumptions that people want to achieve their goals, because the reality is, I mean, all of us, no matter what experience we gain, we're constantly learning. And this is an opportunity, if you have any voice in that process at all, to speak to the people who want a given thing, and from your own basis of expertise, show them how you can achieve the same result, if not something better, within a different working process. It's slow. It's person by person, but especially if we continue to support each other in these efforts, it definitely gets better. Any other questions? Cool black and white dress.
Hi, thank you for the talk. When was the moment that you realized that there were new paths, that there was a different way, not just the crunch, overwork option that it was already established?
I think the exact point, I think I can actually pinpoint that down, because I have a notebook. I keep notebooks of different things because I'm a big old nerd. And I had for years asked a question that in games, we make our work off of repeatable systems. A lot of the way that those systems are used is what defines what the game is. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the box. So I thought, why don't people hand each other's code bases and remix each other's work to produce similar results? Because we already do it in a way because you can't patent game mechanics. So Resident Evil 4 looks like Dead Space. How much faster could they have made Dead Space in a theoretical world where everyone involved was for it, where they just handed over the Resident Evil code base and had the ability to directly work on a different foundation? I had talked to people about it and they said that it couldn't be done. Like that was weird. Why would you do that? So I tried to, based off of the experience I'd had, figure out what a project would look like with a different working process. Not that specific one, but just in general. And in the project, I was planning out, okay, I guess I have to spend 3 years on this game. This game would spend 5 years. This thing would be 1 year. And after that notebook was finished, I believe it was late 2019, I had a realization. At least in the world of video games, you can release something for as little as $100. Being on Steam, the largest PC platform in the world, is a matter of paying a $100 fee. But no one was looking for what a $100 game would look like, or $500, or $5,000. I know, even if I work a minimum wage job, I can take a $5,000 chance again. If someone gives me $5 million, and I mess it up, that ain't happening a second time. Or at least I can't bet on it, again, if we're speaking realistically, with the color of my skin. I'm existing in an industry that was not built for me. So I said, instead of asking how to make the projects that people want, how do I make projects that I know that I can build under my own power, with my own resources, with my own specialties? And suddenly I found collaborators who had similar perspectives, who I could work with, and who I could deliver a vision to, and because they could see not just what we were making, but why we were making it, I could find people who aligned with that specific way of building things. The motto for our studio has become better, faster, cheaper, and healthier, because I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And to date, none of our games have cost what it would take any other studio to produce. There's drawbacks and advantages of what we do, but also every game we've made, except for one, has been profitable, and that game is going to be profitable within a year. We wanted to work different. We had a concrete goal of how to work different, and figuring out the distribution models and systems that I was working within and the opportunities they provided was the first step. So I don't know if animation has anything similar, but hopefully the people in this room will discover it, and then you'll give me like credit and maybe some money, because I still need some. Okay, thank you.
Hi, here. Well, during this talk, I was
starting to confront myself and my system of values. And I started to feel a little bit, not hopeless, but a little bit, because it made me confront my own imposter syndrome. So do you have any tips for that?
Are you good at what you do?
I think so.
Do you do it?
Yes.
You're good at it. To provide a less flippant answer, imposter syndrome is, at least from my experience, often a case not necessarily of self-doubt, but of one of incorrect context. You look at your own efforts, and then you look at one of the incredible celebrities that Pixelatl Festival has brought, like Alex Hirsch, and you're like, I can't write a script as good as that. I'm holding myself up to that standard, and it doesn't feel the same. Or I look at my animation on the page, and it doesn't achieve any similar level of emotion or whatever my goal might be. I think one of the big things that's helped, at least me with imposter syndrome and the people I know, because it's a constant struggle, is change your frame of reference. It's so good that you have a higher standard that you hold yourself to. Never let that go. But from the place where you're currently at, if you can identify concrete things you can work towards, then great. If you can't, you know that as long as you survive long enough to make your next thing, it will be better. You will have grown in the process. Position yourself to make the next thing and the next thing until you can again get enough perspective to identify where to improve intentionally. Yeah, long story short, you know yourself. You can know yourself is my encouragement to you. And from there, if you can't see a place to improve, just make more things. Because in the process, you'll get better. And the version of you who existed 5 years ago would feel imposter syndrome looking at you as well. And I hope that you are kind to that person in your mind and in your heart. Thank you.
Hi.
How much more time? Cool.
So you mentioned a lot about crunching and how you were forced to crunch recently because you were handed a task late. So my question is, for when we need to crunch for something, do you have any tips on safer crunching, or something that we do that might end up like harming our work or ourselves by overworking ourselves?
Good point is I wasn't forced to crunch. I just knew what would happen if I didn't crunch. And I decided that I didn't like the outcome. So for those who couldn't hear, the question was, if we encounter situations where crunch occurs, how do we do it in a more safe and measured way? The advice that, at least the thing that I do for my studio is if people crunch, it is for limited amounts of time. We have periods of rest afterwards. Sometimes people just take off work entirely to have recovery periods. What you're looking at with crunch, because different people have different working processes, we had someone at our studio who they would work they would do the equivalent of a month or 2 months work in 1 week, and then would be basically, I wouldn't say unreachable, but they would basically be unreachable for like a couple of months. And was that frustrating? Yes. But I actually used this and I realized that I was working with someone whose process didn't align with mine. So instead of demanding of that person to change their working perspective or expecting them to change it on the next project as much as I would hope for their own health that they might, I instead made a studio practice where if a big batch of work has come in, we know that that person is going to need 2 months. Let's work around them on an individual basis until they are ready to return. I think if your team has any degree of self-knowledge or can build it so you know that what your threshold is, when you need to step back, how you to get recovery, that's the only major way to get like crunch recovery back, because I've seen studios that try to apply a one-size-fits-all approach. And let's be honest, there's people who they can do like one really good hour of work a day. There's other people who They need to sit at the computer for 10 hours, and then they'll produce something really exceptional, but they need that 10 hours sitting there feeling like the world is going to collapse before they can make their stuff. Judging from the reaction, some of you are that people. I'm so sorry. Know yourself. Work from those limits. Communicate them within your team. And if you know that the people you might be working with, say within a smaller team, not necessarily funding partners, if you know that someone, the way that they work and think and crunch is going to drive you crazy, maybe don't work with them. Because I've seen that take even really successful indie teams and tear them apart. Because there's one person who's a night person, one person who's a morning person, one person who's a meeting person, one person who's not. And they're constantly working in that intersection of ways that they hate each other all the time until the thing comes out. And the thing coming out doesn't relieve the fact that the process itself was harmful. So change the process, change the product, make a better future for yourself and your collaborators. Thank you.
So before we go, I brought you your phone.
Okay.
I thought we can have a selfie with you.
I would love that. This is for my mom. So like, y'all need to look like really excited and like, I changed your lives. If some of you can cry or like punch someone, I'm not saying that you should punch, but like if you can get some tears going, that would be great. Thank you. So, on three. On three, we're going to go Pixelatl, okay? 1, 2, 3, Pixelatl!
Thank you so much. Xalavier, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge. It was a pleasure. And thank you for coming. We're going to see you in the next conference. Give a big applause to Xalavier and